Today we're going to talk a little bit about pain, because I suspect if you have clicked or selected this video, it's because you or someone you know is in a particularly painful time in your life. The Bible is very clear about pain. In Isaiah 55:12, it says, "Once there were thorns, and cypress trees will grow. Where nettles grew, myrtles will sprout up, and these events will bring great honor to the Lord's name." We all identify on one level or another with pain. There's a time in everybody's life when they feel like they've just are in a situation where they're in more pain than they can bear. But God tells us that ultimately He's glorified through those things, and that's a real mystery to us. When I was in college, I was driving home one weekend from the University of Oklahoma to my home in Tulsa, driving down the Turner Turnpike. It was a very, very hot August day, and in my little Ford Pinto, I heard a noise that led me to believe that something had dropped out onto the pavement underneath me, and suddenly my gas pedal, it was as if it wasn't connected to anything. It was just flopping around, and I coasted to the shoulder of the road, and I was kind of panicked because there were no cell phones. There were no pagers in those days. I had no way to contact anybody, and I was in a particularly rural spot on the road. So I got out of the car and raised the hood and all the things that you're supposed to do, and I waited for someone to stop. And I waited a very long time. I got out of the car. I was still in my work clothes. I had a little skirt on, probably shorter than it should have been in the 70s. And waited for someone to stop. And the sun began to go down, and I began to panic. And finally, there was a pickup truck with a camper shell in the back that pulled up behind me. And the gentleman got out, and I walked back to meet him, and he goes, "I can't believe you're still here. We've been listening to people talk about you on the CB for over 2 hours." He said, "Why don't you get in the cab of the truck with my wife and let me see if I can figure out what's going on." I slipped into the cab of the truck, and she had a cold Pepsi ready for me, and it was air conditioned in the truck. And just holding that soda was just amazing. And he worked on the car for a while. Then I saw him walk around in the pavement out on the street, and then he left and went to the back of the truck and rummaged through some things, and I saw him walk by with a coat hanger and a pair of pliers. And I watched him stick his head underneath the hood and begin to work on my car. And while he did that, she shared their story of having just dropped their daughter off, who was 18 years old, in Texas to go to school 19 hours away from home, and how terrible she felt about that, and how she had dreaded that day, tried to participate in the fact that it was exciting for her daughter, but it was just torment to her because they had lost their other daughter several years before in a car accident. She was now their only daughter, and she was going to be 19 miles away from home. So when they saw me on the side of the road, she said, "Paul, we have to stop because that could be our daughter, and we would hope someone would help them." And I realized that the only reason that they had stopped to help me was because of the pain that they had experienced, and they were making great use of that pain. We want to understand more about why the Bible picks cypress and why they pick myrtles. In the Bible, there's multiple mentions of cedar and cypress, and it's used interchangeably. In Kings and in Chronicles, we learn that they built the temple from the cedars of Lebanon. And in Leviticus, we know that sticks of this wood were used in ceremonial purification. Cypress in Louisiana is highly desirable because of the durability and the pest resistance. And now the rivers are dredged to bring up the old cypress. So what is the difference between cypress and that passage and understanding the nature of God in our toughest time? It ultimately represents the fact that God is glorified in our pain. I believe that myrtles are mentioned for an entirely different reason. They are a highly prized flower. In Egypt, they were used for a lot of medicinal purposes, and they were used in a lot of ceremonies. And in the UK today, still, royalty brides have them in their bridal bouquet. they have a useful meaning today in Jewish worship. Esther in the Bible is another one of my very favorite stories. She was orphaned at an early child, and she was raised by her uncle Mordecai. But she had been brought to the castle and was a bride for the ruler there, and she wasn't to reveal the fact that she was Jewish, because it was a problem in those days. The Hebrew people were persecuted and not well thought of. So Mordecai came to Esther at one point in time and he said, "Your people are being very persecuted, and if you will just go to the king and explain that you are Hebrew and advocate for your people, then they will be saved." And she said, "I can't do that, because if I do, it's possible that the king will have me put to death." A very thorny situation. Everything was at stake. And we know that she ultimately did go to the king, and she did reveal to him that she was Hebrew, and she pleaded on behalf of her people, and they were saved. Esther's name before she was brought to the temple was Hadassah. That was her Hebrew name. Hadassah in Hebrew means myrtle. She was the myrtle. And while we sit about and we worry about whether some cypress will come and save us or some myrtle will come and save us while we're in an extremely thorny situation, the scriptures are telling us we are to be the myrtle. We are growing into and transforming into that myrtle. So ultimately the message in this scripture is, you have what you need. You are who you're supposed to be. You have everything you need to make it through this situation. Just bring those things to God. Bring who you are and bring what you have, and it will be enough. The couple that came to my rescue when I was on this side of the road only had a coat hanger. And that coat hanger lasted in my car until I sold it 2.5 years later. So bring what you have, and it will be enough to get you through this. God bless you.